Hello and welcome to Locals Supporting Locals, the heartbeat of the Okanagan. I am your host, Kevin Proto, and I'm joined by my lovely co-host, Dee Nicholson. How are you, Dee?
I'm well, Kevin, and you?
Fantastic. Actually, it was quite the exciting day here in our Okanagan here in Penticton, with local elections coming closer and closer here. We just seem to get more things that the city is getting their foot in their mouths for here. And currently, our city here has a woman here of defamation of a city employee or a city staff, and they actually hired a lawyer, not local, but out of Vancouver here, at $800 an hour because of her opinions that she puts into our Penticton Herald, into our local newspaper here. And they had already taken on the Penticton Hospitality Association, of which they lost $50,000 at the cost of taxpayers. And now they're going after this woman who has, since 2008, who ran for city council, has just been very, very, she holds our city council and city staff accountable. And now they're going after her for defamation of character. And so she just had a press release right in at the city steps of City Hall here, and you'll get at localsupportinglocal.ca, and that'll lead us to the YouTube channel here. But lots going on, and this is happening globally, and the whole premise of our show is taking what's happening to us locally, provincially, federally, and globally, but bring it back to a local level at how we solve the issues that face us in today's world here. So it's just about connecting these farmers, individuals, in harmony with local values all around the world here. So we're very privileged tonight to have an exclusive here, where Dee Nicholson is actually stepping out of being our co-host and being the investigative reporter that she is. Tonight's story, or tonight's show, is an exclusive on glyphosate's Monsanto herring. So if you can tell us a little bit more about what you mean by this, Dee.
Well, it's not herring, Kevin. It's a red herring.
Herring.
Okay.
Red herring. I apologize.
Yeah. Slight difference. Okay. The point is that activists around the world have for a while now been chasing the GMO labeling issue, and it's gotten huge. It is going global. We have whole nations and governments participating in this. But what I have discovered, along with a number of other very, very highly educated and well-researched individuals around the world, is that this is essentially a red herring. And it really isn't what's the culprit in all of the illnesses and detrimental effects that we're seeing from the GMO side, from Monsanto. But most people have been thinking that it's all about the genetically modified organisms. It isn't. Now, tonight, we have a very special guest here to provide the most excellent backup. We have with us Dr. Stephanie Seneff, who will be speaking in a few minutes with me. And she is a senior research scientist from MIT. And she has, an undergraduate degree in biophysics and a PhD in computer science. And let me tell you, this woman knows her stuff. I don't think I have to go any farther than that. But here's the big deal, okay? What we're looking at is essentially an issue where you've got a company that has been producing some very toxic products over a very great number of years. Excuse me, that being Monsanto, everybody's favorite company. And we've been looking at genetically modified foods and organisms that have been coming out since the 1990s. But what has really been happening is that there is another element here that has been around since the 70s that also emanates from Monsanto, that the genetically modified organisms are dependent upon, and which, interestingly enough, my, what a surprise, all of the physical damage that's being done supposedly by GMOs is actually and has been occurring already in the population because of glyphosate. Now, glyphosate started its life as a descaler, meaning that if you had industrial steam pipes and things that would get deposits, you know how your kettle in your kitchen gets deposits. After boiling a lot of water in the kettle, you'll find like white lime deposits and things. And this stuff, glyphosate, was initially invented as a descaler, okay? And in terms of the human body, that translates into a chelator. Now, Stephanie will explain more what that's about, but essentially what's going on is it's this glyphosate stuff that is doing so much damage to the human organism and has been and is ubiquitous because everybody's using it. It's a product called Roundup, which was put on the market in 1974. And ever since 1974, people have been using Roundup not only in agricultural applications, but also in their own backyards. Now, you think that
which is also being quite safe to drink, right?
Well, no, we're not going to talk about that, Kevin.
Okay, well, that...
basically, what you've got is you've got a situation where people are applying a toxic product to their own home gardens. They don't know how toxic it is. They don't know what kind of damage it can cause. They don't know that it bioaccumulates in the human organism, and they don't know when 15 years later they go to the doctor and they get diagnosed with this or that, primarily liver and kidney damage that is ubiquitous. Again, Sri Lanka just banned glyphosate entirely because of the liver and kidney damage that Sri Lankans are suffering right now. So we've got all kinds of hoo-ha going on, but it is split in a direction that is trying to nail genetically modified organisms for the harm that glyphosate does. This is why I've called it a red herring. It's a false trail. It has us chasing the wrong element because we can get rid of every GMO on the planet, but until we get rid of Roundup and other pesticides, bearing in mind Roundup lost its patent protection in 2000. It's been floating around being copied by other manufacturers for nearly 15 years. So that being the case, we've got all kinds of imitators out there. The type of chemical that comes out of this is a neonicotinoid, which is what's being blamed for the colony collapse in bees. And of course, if we lose our bees, we lose our earth. We lose our food supply entirely. We lose everything. And, all of this is going on. And so in the meantime, the Organic Consumers Association, Mike Adams, the Health Ranger, the Alliance for National Health in Britain and in the U.S., all these major organizations are all chasing the GMOs. Every single one of them is after. You got to label GMOs. Well, in the first place, I always disagreed with that. And the reason I always disagreed with it is because labeling anything doesn't stop the breeze. And the breeze is how plants are pollinated. The breeze, the birds, squirrels, small animals, rain, you name it, it all moves seed and pollen from one place to another. And unfortunately for mankind, it doesn't follow orders. It doesn't respect borders. It doesn't tell you, you can't tell it where to stop or where to start. And so consequently, you've got a convergence of situations here. You've got genetically modified crops being planted all over the place. They, in turn, are pollinating and cross-pollinating fields around them. You can't protect these fields. And consequently, what we've got is we've got a horrendous situation where these things are loose in the environment. It may already be too late in terms of the damage that these things can do. But the problem that we've really got is we've got to get rid of the glyphosate. We have to acknowledge, and this is going to be the hard part, because people around the world all believe, and they have been enforced by millions of dollars being dumped into this program of red herring by the pro-GMO side, namely the Grocery Manufacturers Association, Monsanto, the biotech industries, and largely the North American governments, who have dragged their heels horribly on this issue. Now, in the meantime, all the people who are listening to all these reports and reading all this stuff are saying, oh, GMOs are bad, Frankenfood's bad. Well, but they're not noticing the glyphosate, and it's not the Frankenfoods. But you see, what happened initially was that when Monsanto put Roundup on the market, well, it's a garden variety pesticide or herbicide, just a garden variety herbicide, nothing to write home about. You know, you either bought it or you didn't, you used it or you didn't, no big deal. But then when people came out and said, oh, they're genetically modifying food and they're putting fish genes into tomatoes, people went, ew, Frankenfood. So they had a gut response to GMOs, but they had no such gut response to pesticide or herbicide. No such gut response.
Sorry, Dee, but because even for myself, and I come across as a concerned citizen here, can you explain the difference between herbicide and pesticide?
Yeah, a herbicide kills plants. A pesticide kills pests.
Thank you.
Not hard. Insects, bugs, worms, beetles, you know, that kind of thing. That's a pesticide. That's the BT side of things. That is what the BT cotton, genetically modified to resist the cotton boll and the boll weevil and on bugs like that, and BT corn, which is about 80-90% of the corn which is grown. A lot of it is grown for alcohol synthesis for car fuel and motor fuel, but we're still eating genetically modified corn in massive proportions. And I can almost hardly wait to let Stephanie start talking about what this stuff will do to you. But in the meantime, like I said, what we've got here is we've got a whole population of this planet that has been geared through propaganda and through a lack of information and partial information. They've been geared to looking at the wrong thing. Now, a couple of weeks ago, we had Dr. Thierry Vrain on the show, and Thierry was actually the guy who tipped me off. Thierry started talking about the cytochrome P450 gene, which is responsible for a whole bunch of other stuff that Stephanie will explain. And I remembered that several months back I got an article in my email from a lady in the States who runs the Vaccine Liberation Army, a lady by the name of Eileen Danneman, who a lot of people may be familiar with. And she was talking about, in this particular article, how the cytochrome P450 gene is responsible for the production of things like serotonin and all of that. But what she also said was that this particular gene prevents the metabolism of antidepressants. I'm thinking, wait a minute. A quarter of the population of the United States is on antidepressants. What does that mean? All that medication going down the toilet because essentially it can't do anybody any good. I mean, I don't like the stuff anyway, but if it can help, then it can help. But here it's prevented from helping. So you got a quarter of the United States not getting the benefit out of the meds they are taking. Then you got everybody else who's eating the stuff, and it's now estimated that every American citizen consumes their own weight in genetically modified food every year. So that gives you an idea of exactly how ubiquitous genetically modified products are, because they may not be the prime component of something you buy at the store. It may be an ingredient on the label, and they'll hide them in all kinds of different ways. Modified cornstarch, modified this, modified that. What do you think that means, modified? Changed. So here we are in a situation where we have dangerous stuff, glyphosate-laced stuff all over our supermarkets. We are swallowing the stuff by the ton, and everybody thinks it's something else doing the damage. Now, I would, at this point, I would like to bring Stephanie on. Stephanie, you've been very patient waiting. Thank you so much.
You've done a very good job of introducing the topic. I've been enjoying listening to you.
Oh, thank you. But I really want to let people get a gist of exactly how dangerous this stuff is. This stuff, and you've been working for years to expose exactly how dangerous it is. But this stuff is absolutely stunningly, horribly toxic. And essentially what this little red herring game has done is divert and distract and disengage our attention as a population away from something that's doing us a great deal of harm and placing it on something that isn't even proven to do any real harm, which is the GMOs on their own without the pesticide or herbicide aspect added in. Right. So if you would, please, Stephanie, I know you started at the beginning to tell us how you essentially got interested in this because of the autism factor, right. Because one of the things that glyphosate does with this gene interference is to make people particularly vulnerable to vaccine damage. And my, doesn't the chain link start from there?
I know.
So without further ado, Stephanie, please tell us exactly what glyphosate does.
Yeah, well, that's a fine introduction. So I don't know where to begin. I mean, I should start with the story of autism and my own pursuit of this. I was determined to find out what it is in the environment that's causing this epidemic. Mm-hmm. And it was 7 or 8 years ago that I started to get really worried because I saw that the rates were going up. They've, of course, continued to go up dramatically since then. You know, we've now got 1 in 68 of the 12-year-olds. This is 12-year-olds that they're measuring. If you've heard the new results from the CDC, 1 in 68 kids. I don't know what the number is for the newborns, but it's much higher than that. It has to be because it keeps on going up, and you have to add the additional 12 years to get to the newborns today. It's really scary. I mean, if I were having a child today, I would be very worried about the possibility of my child having autism, which is a very debilitating condition. You know, I mean, in the extreme case, these kids are going to be under your care, in your home, under constant care for the rest of their lives. I mean, many of them are really unable to live an independent life, and very, very costly in the school system. You think of all the school children having to cope with all these autistic kids that are overburdening the financial, aspects of just trying to educate our kids. It's going to be a really, really big problem. It's already a very big problem. Mm-hmm. So I wanted to figure it out, and I looked at every single toxic chemical I could think of, including, of course, aluminum and mercury in vaccines, which are definitely a part of the story. I have no doubt about that. But I was frustrated, because I looked at all these things, lead and arsenic and all the different toxic chemicals, the various PCBs, and fluoride. I mean, nothing was adding up. I understood, I learned so much about what autism was, and I understood that there was a major problem with the gut. There's a really good connection between gut dysbiosis, basically upset stomach, diarrhea, difficulty with eating, like having very, very picky about foods, and constipation, diarrhea, stomach aches, all this kind of stuff that happens with the autistic kids is totally connected to the autism. And so recently researchers have done a lot of work on the gut-brain axis, to see that our gut bacteria really have a huge amount to do with our general health. And when they're not happy, our brain's not happy either. And that's how you can get into really a broken brain as a consequence of a broken gut. And so I was, flabbergasted when I went to hear a talk by Dr. Don Huber. He's a retired professor from Purdue University, an expert on plant physiology. And he laid it out, bacteria in the soil, bacteria in the gut. Same thing. Glyphosate disrupts the bacteria in the soil and does the same thing in the gut. Overgrowth of pathogens, like C. difficile, producing toxic chemicals like toxic phenols, makes the child have autism. And I was like, wow, this is the answer. Because I'd written papers talking about the gut problem, but I was frustrated because I couldn't say what was causing the gut problem. That was the part that was missing. So glyphosate filled that gap very, very nicely. And from there, I just started reading everything I could about what glyphosate does, and it was just amazing how easy it was to connect the dots. I mean, I have so many different ways now. As you mentioned, the cytochrome P450 enzymes, it disrupts them, and those are very, very important for detoxifying all the other toxic chemicals in the environment. So that's what gets into the thing with aluminum, the vaccines. The toxic chemicals in the vaccines are going to need the stuff that glyphosate is destroying in order to be detoxified. So it makes the aluminum more toxic than it would otherwise be in the vaccines.
And, of course, we're getting not only the aluminum in the vaccines, we're also getting it dumped on us out of chemtrails.
I know. I am so disturbed about that. That's
so I mean, if they don't get you one way, they're going to get you another. Obviously, the vaccine
looks like they're trying to do us in,
Well, here's the thing, though. The vaccine schedule is aimed at kids. Where did they get the aluminum jammed into the adults? Well, it's the chemtrails.
I know. It's really scary. There's I don't know if it's a naivety on their part or what, because I cannot understand how they can think it's a good idea to do that.
Oh, it's not naivety, let me tell you. and one of the reasons I can say that is as you know, and other people will soon find out, there is a massive big article that is going to go out with this particular broadcast, and in it I start with a quote from the former Secretary of State for the United States, Robert McNamara, who then went on to become the head of the World Bank. And in 1972, look at the timing, this is 2 years before Monsanto drops Roundup on the market, he says that they're not happy with the measure of depopulation that is going on. And he's quoted as saying, we have to step up these methods, and he says, how? By natural means, famine and sickness. And this was quoted from him in a French magazine. Notice it did not make American mainstream media. Har, har, where's the news? Well, apparently it's in France, because it was in a French magazine called J'ai tout compris, which means I understood everything.
Yeah.
And he comes out and he says this particular quote. Well, funny thing about that, a couple of years later, along comes Monsanto and says, hey, I think we can help you with that one.
Yeah, I mean, I wish I knew. They did their studies, and they supposedly proved that that glyphosate, which is Roundup, was, very non-toxic to humans. Don't worry about it at all, no problem. And they've been maintaining that message ever since then. When you look at their studies are grossly, grossly inadequate, and they've basically, I mean, I can't imagine how the government was willing to allow those studies to pass muster. When you think about the amount of toxic chemicals that are being dumped on us now, with this particular chemical is a all-purpose herbicide. It kills all plants except for those few that have been engineered to be Roundup Ready, and that's where the GMO comes in. And you didn't exactly explain that, but you have this GMO Roundup Ready corn, GMO Roundup Ready soy, sugar beets, alfalfa, cotton, tobacco, and canola. These are the basic core GMO Roundup Ready crops. You spray Roundup on them, they don't die. But the problem is they soak up the Roundup and it gets into the food chain, and no one's bothering to look to see how much is there. Because the government thinks, this stuff is harmless, so we don't care. and it's extremely difficult, even if someone wants to get a measure of how much they have in their urine or in their breast milk, which is what there was this group of women, this Moms Across America, a wonderful organization headed by Zen Honeycutt, and they took the initiative to get measures of glyphosate in their urine and in their breast milk, and they showed amounts in their breast milk that were 1,600 times higher than the upper limit allowed in water in Europe. So you're feeding your baby. Yeah. You're basically feeding your baby glyphosate in that circumstance. And these women were conscientious about trying to avoid GMOs. So you can't imagine if you pulled a woman who's just, chowing down on corn chips and Coca-Cola, I mean, it's really scary to me. I mean, it's no wonder to me that we have this autism epidemic. The government should be ashamed of themselves because they are just completely unwilling to see the evidence that's staring them in the face.
Well,
I should mention at this point, I should mention Nancy Swanson. She's a PhD in physics, and, she was having a lot of health issues. She figured out if she went on to an organic diet that she was much better off and her health healed. And she started, as a physicist, she can do numbers, and she started looking at numbers on the web. You can get a lot of information, and you can get information about how much Roundup is being used on corn and soy crops over time, looking back over the past 15, 20 years. And what you see is a tremendous and steady rise. It's much, much more is being used today than was used 15 years ago, right in step with the increased adoption of these Roundup-ready crops. So what's happening is that the weeds are becoming resistant. They're using so much Roundup on these crops, the weeds are outsmarting the chemical, and then they have to keep on using more.
It just goes to show you, even a plant has a survival instinct.
I know, it's incredible that they can adapt so quickly. I mean, I would hope that we could become Roundup ready. We need to become Roundup ready, or else we're all going to die out at the rate we're going. Because the number of diseases she showed that were, 0.99 correlation coefficient. Nearly all of these are greater than 0.95. Autism is 0.997. I mean, 1.0 is the highest you can be. You have a plot of autism in the U.S. in the first grade over time for the past 15 years, and you look at a plot of glyphosate usage on corn and soy, the two plots coincide. They are exactly matched. And you can, and so they scream at us all the time, correlation doesn't necessarily mean causation. You should ignore this. I mean, they're happy with correlation meaning causation when they see high cholesterol, and they'll give you a statin drug, That's a much weaker correlation than what we're seeing here. So they're talking out of two sides of their mouth when they say that. Just because it doesn't necessarily mean causation doesn't mean that when you see a 0.99 correlation coefficient, you ignore it. The first thing you do is you say, well, maybe there's a causative connection here. Let me take a look. That's what any scientist would do. And that's what I did. And when you take a look, you find all kinds of evidence that explains why glyphosate would cause autism.
Yeah, but if you notice today, though, with all the science coming out here, nothing goes back to the source of the problem. It's a reaction solution. So they see what the problem. It's almost like they create the problem, then they wait for the reaction, and they give you the solution, but they never go back to the source anymore of what causes it.
Well, of course, they can't go back to the source because they caused it.
Yeah, right.
Exactly.
Okay, you have to realize this is problem reaction solution at its finest. At its finest.
Yes.
Create a problem, supply the solution. Okay? They did this with glyphosate. They created a problem, they supplied the solution. In fact, they supplied two solutions. They supplied Roundup, and then they supplied Roundup Ready. So they did both ends of it. And then they turned around and they said, genetic modification, that's going to solve everything. And yet really what the issue was in the first place was the use of Roundup. So
I think it's not only, of course, it's destroying our health, it's also destroying all these animals. The ladybugs, starting with the ladybugs many years ago, they ate the aphids. The aphids were loaded with Roundup. They died. And you have the bats today in New England with the white nose disease. Glyphosate causes fungus infection in corn, and it's a fungus disease that these guys have. Fungus is everywhere now. All these species are going extinct because of fungus infection, which I think is being caused by the glyphosate. And the glyphosate is killing the bees. I mean, it's along with you mentioned the neonicotinoids, which are a major factor in the bees, but the glyphosate is a partner in crime there, because it makes the neonicotinoids much more toxic than they would otherwise be by messing up the cytochrome P450 enzymes. So, I mean, glyphosate is implicated in all these stressed species that we're seeing, which is really scary. There's all the species that are eating the insects. I mean, the bats eat their weight in insects every day. So by killing the bats, you're making the insect problem much worse. And now you've got to use more of the pesticides, you know? It's an endless battle.
Kidding. Well,
these people, chemicals, and
these people have no respect for the balance of nature.
I know. You're ruining the soil. Once you ruin the soil, you know, then you're going to have terrible problems with nutritional deficiencies and droughts. I mean, it's really scary to me. It's just insane.
Yeah, it is. It is. And like I said at the top of the show, the thing that is most scary to me is the factor of this red herring and how very successful they've been at convincing everybody, basically convincing everybody that the problem is over there when the problem is really over here.
I think when people get comfortable with the idea they can run down to the hardware store, buy some Roundup, you know, kill the weeds in their yard rather carelessly, I mean, they get the perception. When you see something that prevalent in your environment and then being used by that many people, you gain confidence that it's fine.
Yeah, you trust it, and this is
very hard to undo that.
This is a problem because, like I said, they introduced Roundup, excuse me, in the 70s. Right? They don't introduce actual GMOs until 20 years later.
You're right.
They let people come out with the ew frankenfood reaction, the gut reaction, okay? And in the meantime, what they're doing is they're using genetically modified organisms as a delivery system for glyphosate.
That's right. That's exactly right. And in fact, a recent study on soy, they looked at organic and they looked at conventional soy, which wasn't GMO, but they used Roundup to control the weeds. And then they looked at Roundup Ready soy, and they looked at glyphosate content in those three kinds of soy, and they found none in the conventional, even though Roundup was being used to kill the weeds, because you couldn't put it on the plant without killing it. Whereas they found tons, you know, really at alarmingly high level in the GMO Roundup Ready soy, which, of course, goes into soy formula for the babies.
Exactly.
Well, here's what's funny or new is... and I'm learning more about this. A gentleman that's going to be running for council here, he teaches food forestry, and it's funny some of the things that people are spraying with the Roundup here, like dandelions, we're finding out is actually food to us, and it's actually very good for us. And so this gentleman teaches kids and adults how many things that we consider to be weeds or pests or a pain in our butt are actually good for us, you know. So it just doesn't make sense.
I know dandelion greens are actually very healthy.
Yeah, they're actually a lot like spinach. But you know, the thing that drives me crazy is the fact that, you know, like you said, when you introduce something as a common garden variety product, that, there's a new pesticide on the market. There's a new herbicide on the market. People go, well, is this going to clear my garden? Those nasty dandelions and the pigweed and the thistles and this and that. Is that going to do that? And if it does, they say wonderful. They don't even think, is this stuff going to bioaccumulate in the plant? Is it going to bioaccumulate in my body if I eat the plant?
Yeah, and now I think breathing the fumes when you're working with it is probably not good for you either.
And check this out. I get an article in today from globalresearch.ca, which is a really strong, powerful science-based site and very evidence-based site on political issues as well as scientific ones. And apparently Germany has now demanded that there's going to be no more GMO food fed to chickens.
I heard it was even more than chickens, that all the meats that they were, like farm animals. I thought it was more generally, but I heard that too. It's a wonderful news that they're demanding that they eat non-GMO feed.
Well, that's nice. Now, if we can get them off anything that involves Roundup or any of these pesticides, maybe we can make a whole lot of progress. But
I know.
You've got all kinds of chickens and cows and pigs and whatever that are being fed GMO feed, and you wonder how come they're having to load them with antibiotics and this and that and everything else. Well, it's because they're eating this stuff that isn't
They're very
keeping them
sick,
healthy.
Actually. They're very sick. I mean, in fact, I just came back from a conference in Beijing, which was really awesome. They invited experts from around the world to discuss the GMOs, and particularly glyphosate. It was quite a good show on glyphosate. But there were farmers, both from the Europe, a Danish farmer from Europe, and farmers from America that talked about all the health issues that the pigs are having and the cows are having, you know, and being born with major defects, terrible defects, and calves, piglets refusing to thrive. It's basically a failure to thrive. When they're weaned, they won't eat. They won't eat the food that's given to them, which is this GMO Roundup Ready. They'd rather die than to eat that food, and so they just waste away and die. You know, and that's a big problem with the piglets. When you look at that kind of behavior among the animals, which are getting a lot more glyphosate in their feed than we're getting in ours, because they have much higher residue limits allowed for the animals than they do for the humans.
And speaking
Plus, they
of
can't
that,
read labels.
Take a look at that and think, you know, wait a minute, if they're doing this, what's going to happen to me if I eat this stuff? Or if I even eat the pig, because
and of course
it shows up in the chicken. You know, they've looked at residues of glyphosate in the different organs, and they found it in the muscles of the chicken. So when you eat the chicken meat, you've got glyphosate there as well. It's not just that you can avoid plants and not get glyphosate, you know, because it's going straight through the animal.
No, it's in the meat. It's in the meat.
The meat.
And the thing that really kind of put a capper on everything for me was that last year, and this is a long time after the Seralini study, a long time after activism started on GMOs, a long time later, what does the EPA do? Well, they doubled the amount of glyphosate allowable in seed oil crops, and they increased the amount of glyphosate allowable in food crops by 3,000%, quietly, without anyone knowing.
And it looks to me like what they do is they say, whoops, we're measuring it, it's higher than our limit, let's raise our limit, rather than saying, what is the actual limit that's tolerable, you know?
And not only that, that's exactly what they did. That's exactly what they did with Fukushima. When Fukushima became very, very irradiated and was dumping all kinds of radiation into the ocean and into the air, what did the government of the United States do? What did the government of Canada do? They raised the allowable limits.
Yeah,
rather than fix the problem, they raise the limits.
It's always the case that they just look at what's there and just decide the way we're going to pass this is just to put the limit just above where it's showing up, right? Just comfortably above. And then as things go up, they just raise the limit to fix the problem. I mean, it's just so pathetic. There's no one even looking to see how much is actually safe, you know, which is probably zero.
No,
but we have to go back to something that you mentioned earlier here, Dee, is about the deregulation agenda, and people really need to go back and look at this for everything that they're doing, because like a lot of the green groups initiate when you go to their websites due to overpopulation and peak oil, you know, so. We have to get that out there the most, is that overpopulation is a myth, and it's created by them.
Well, here's the thing.
You know,
you're not going to be able to do that, Kevin. Okay? You're just not going to be able to do it. And the reason I say that is because too many people who are disconnected from the mainstream of any kind of knowledge or truth are getting the idea that this is true. There are still many millions of people who believe in global warming, despite the fact that there are people clamoring for the return of Al Gore's Nobel Peace Prize. So they still believe. And if they still believe, then you've got a problem. So what we have to do, actually, is we have to show people where the real problem is, and we have to let that filter through. We have to hammer away at it until it filters through. And this is why I chose to follow the red herring aspect to say, look, they're defrauding us. They're lying to us. They are totally lying to us. And because they're totally lying to us, we have to be responsible for getting the truth out. And if we don't, we're not only messing with something that damages the earth, we're messing with something that can kill us.
Yeah, I mean, it's really, I think it's going to really upset life on Earth in general because it's affecting so many species.
Well, it already has.
Not just the animals, but also the microbes in the soil. I mean, we're really, really messing up the soil with these toxic chemicals. And, of course, glyphosate. So glyphosate is considered the most harmless of all the herbicides. And they have these other ones like 2,4-D and atrazine that are regulated. Glyphosate is unregulated. It's considered to be so harmless. But that's what makes it so dangerous because people use it carelessly, and it's so much more used than anything else. It's by far the most common herbicide being used in this country. And it's far more toxic than people realize. In fact, a study was done recently, and they compared a whole bunch of herbicides and a whole bunch of pesticides for toxicity, and they were very surprised to find that of all the things they looked at, glyphosate was the most toxic. Roundup was the most toxic of everything they looked at, including the ones that were restricted use. So they have managed to get it past the regulators through manipulating the results, through shoddy research, really, because the tricky thing about glyphosate is it takes time for the problems to appear. So, Seralini's studies, which you mentioned, Seralini did this incredible study looking at rats over their entire lifetime and feeding them these Roundup-ready, GMO corn and soy. And after 3 months, they looked okay. They couldn't really tell the difference between the ones that were eating organic and the ones that weren't. It wasn't until 4 months that they started to see the damage. Well, all the experiments that Monsanto has done and all the chemical industry have done are only 3 months long. So they
wonder why, eh?
Yeah. So you wonder, did they decide 3 months just because they thought that's probably long enough, or did they decide 3 months because they noticed that 4 months was bad? I mean, I don't know which one, right?
No.
We don't know.
We can take an educated guess now, can't we?
Yes.
I'm not prevented from saying things like it's free speech, right? And in my humble opinion, I go to a court scenario where, Your Honor, the defendant knew or ought to have known.
Yeah. And
there is no question that having all the research, I mean, come on, they bought this chelator product. They bought the chelator. They turned it into a herbicide. They obviously analyzed it and played with it and tested it and did all kinds of stuff with it. And if they're going to try and turn around and tell me now they don't know it does harm.
I know, it would be very, very surprising if they don't know.
Well, I mean, come on. I got a lovely bridge in Brooklyn. I'd like to sell them.
Right. And I'll tell you, the other trick is that Roundup itself is much more toxic than glyphosate alone. Roundup has additional ingredients in it that are called adjuvants and surfactants, and they're all patented, and you aren't even allowed to know what they are. But when the people who have studied these things, the independent researchers, have seen that these adjuvants increase the toxicity of the active ingredient by 100 to 1,000-fold more than what it would be without the adjuvants. Of course, when they study glyphosate, the industry, they study it in isolation. They should be studying it in the product because the product is what you're going to be exposed to.
Exactly.
Somehow they get by with these shoddy research methods that allow them to pretend that it's not toxic,
Well, you know what? You know who promotes that kind of method? Is Health Canada. Health Canada, which sold off its state-of-the-art labs a number of years ago and now does no testing at all, allows these guys to do, they allow these guys to do their own testing and say, hey, it's safe. Look, we tested it. It's safe.
Yeah, let the foxes, take care of the chicken coop, right?
Yeah, well, I know a few chickens who might object to that, but, what am I? I'm just a layperson. I don't know anything, right?
I don't understand how governments can just stand by and let this happen. I mean, when they see their population getting as sick as our population is getting, why does U.S. have such a high healthcare costs,
Oh, boy, am I glad you asked.
Than anybody else, right?
Oh, boy, am I glad you asked. Well, you see, here's the thing. We got this little thing called trade groups. And Monsanto, when they put Roundup on the market, they laid the golden egg and they knew it.
Yeah.
because they not only knew that they had the answer, okay? They had the answer to Robert McNamara's wet dream, which was to depopulate the earth, okay? And they had the delivery system to do it, and they had the methodology that could work without anybody being the wiser. And sure enough, this is exactly what they did. So here we go. We're coming along, and we're getting to the point where everything's getting a little bit crazy. People are starting to get sick, and autism is rearing its head. And when you look at all the different factors and you add up the dots, they make a very clear picture that it's not GMOs that need labeling. It's glyphosate.
Yeah, glyphosate needs banning. It needs to be banned.
It needs to be banned. But
and also all the other herbicides as well. I mean, we need to go back to organic farming. We need
we do.
We have to do it that way. And we need to find a way to make sustainable agriculture work. It's the only path forward if we want to save humanity. I mean, that's the way I feel. I feel very strongly about this.
Well, I think you're absolutely correct. I mean, organic is the way to go. It's the way things have always grown on this planet until the Monsanto Chemical Company, which was its original name, by the way, is the Monsanto Chemical Company.
Yeah, I mean, it just doesn't make sense to me that we just are willing to embrace the concept of putting toxic poisons on our food. I mean, it's just really crazy when you think about it, that we allow that to happen.
When I was talking to our friend Rose, now Rose is she is one hot mama when it comes to activism against GMOs, and she is one of the coordinators of the anti-GMO and anti-glyphosate tour and the testing of glyphosate tour that's going across Canada right now, featuring Dr. Terry Vrain, and it had Shiv Chopra in there, Dr. Shiv Chopra, and also Tony Mitra, who's yes, I know you do, and they're all setting up this glyphosate testing and trying to get that initiated. And at the time that we were talking, and like I said, Terry Vrain on the show a couple of weeks ago, he really tipped me off by mentioning that one gene, and I started connecting the dots. And once I connected the dots, I went, holy crap, because the timing of everything has been meticulous. And then on top of that, what did they do? They got this golden egg laid, and along come the trade agreements.
Yes, I
and
know.
The trade agreements,
part of the problem.
Well, the trade agreements guarantee profits. This is the thing. If you are an investor corporation and you come into a country that's under a trade agreement and you open an office and you set up a sales staff and you retail your product across the country, all of your patented goods are protected in the sense that the country guarantees you under the TRIPS rules that are in all of the trade agreements. If you don't know what they are, look them up, WTO.org. Search on the site for TRIPS, TRIPS, and you will find it. And what it calls intellectual property rules are really patents. And it explains on the World Trade Organization site what is an intellectual property. It's, well, whatever you create with your own mind. Okay? So it's a patent. It's an invention. And so these guys are protected. They're profit protected. And the international trade agreements are international law. They supersede all of our domestic law. And because they supersede all of our domestic law, our courts can't say no.
I know. That's what's so scary. They basically are, I think, bringing the power all the way to the top, even above the countries. And then they're disenfranchising the bottom, especially, the counties and the states. No power,
That's precisely it.
And then they want the countries to also have no power.
Okay, well, it's funny that, if I can jump in here for a second here, after this yesterday's council meeting, what they started here in Penticton is you can actually meet with the mayor, and you can have direct contact and questions. And a local businessman here actually asked our city here which is now called the Corporation of Penticton, and asked them exactly what that meant, and then also led down the path of how where these behind or in-camera meetings took place and how they're held to secrecy, and they cannot tell what's going on in those meetings because of the corporate agreements.
Wow.
So the thing that we do with locals supporting locals is take back local government. But what the provincial and the federal governments are holding our cities and changing the laws for them, so they can't even talk because these are held in camera, and you will lose your position.
I can tell you that our famous crackhead mayor, Rob Ford, is against the secrecy as well. But then you get into, if you start delving into that, you have to delve into ICLEI and World Urban Forum and all kinds of little organizations that they have set up to set up the smaller little organisms like the corporation of the town of whatever to follow along the lines of what the trade agreements are saying. These things are built in, top down and bottom up. They've been doing it for a long time.
They're very clever, actually.
Oh, I know, that is the message that I was trying to get out there to people. It's not about Penticton, but it's happening everywhere.
Yeah.
And so we have to change the laws. No matter what, it's still got to be done at the grassroots level. If we're going to change anything, we have to
it may need to happen outside of the law because the whole government situation is so controlled that we need to have a grassroots uprising of the population, which happens simply because people choose to buy organic. And that's just what I tell everybody. Buy organic and tell all your friends to buy organic. We can change it through the consumer demand. And I think that's a better path.
Absolutely.
Well, it's all about money.
That's why.
And if you value your health and your children's health, then you should be eating organic food. That's what we do. We buy only organic. Luckily, Whole Foods has really improved on their organic choices. Every day I see more. It's wonderful. And you can get most things organic these days at Whole Foods.
Yeah, you can. In fact, you can get a wider organic selection at a lot of places.
The local grocery store opened up an organic section,
Oh, yeah.
Just the
they're all doing that up here.
Shop. So there's obviously pressure from the consumer. And the farmer's going to know that. The farmers are going to want to go organic, too, because it's healthier for them. They don't have to expose themselves to these chemicals. So I think that's the way we're going to do it, not through the legal government system, because that system is so corrupt and so controlled.
It's gone.
By these industries, that it's not going to happen there.
Well, and another thing is starting up local food co-ops and getting the farmers involved.
Absolutely.
I think that I would like to spend the last few minutes of this show talking about an aspect that everybody can do and that everybody should be doing, and that is demanding the labeling of glyphosate in food products.
Yes.
Because it is an additive. Nature did not put it there. Man did. So therefore, it qualifies as an additive, and glyphosate, if it is even trace represented in any kind of a food product, should be as strictly labeled as our natural health products, which have to account for every ding-blasted molecule in their product. Now, when it comes
vitamin C, why can't you put in glyphosate?
Why can't you put in glyphosate? It should be labeled. It's there, and it's not natural. If it's not natural, we should have the right to know. And I'm not so concerned about the GMO labeling, and the reason I'm not is because that doesn't stop genetic drift, but it can stop Roundup.
Right.
And if you put glyphosate. Exactly. And if you put Roundup, if you put glyphosate on a food label and people don't buy the product because of the glyphosate,
yes.
Well, then the climate changes, doesn't it?
It certainly does, and that would be fantastic.
Yeah, so what we really need is we need the glyphosate to be labeled, and on the basis of the fact that countries around the world are now starting to ban the stuff.
Yes,
and because they're starting to ban it, we have a right to know if we're eating it. It obviously, other people think it's toxic. We know it's toxic. and we need to make sure that this stuff is no longer in our food supply, or we simply will not have a food supply. Plain and simple. Plain and simple.
Well, at the same token, though, in saying that, though, with the labeling, and you pointed this out earlier, Dee, and Stephanie, it actually needs a full-out ban here.
Okay. We need to push for the labeling of glyphosate, because that will lead to a ban on glyphosate. We don't need to worry about banning it if we can label it.
Yeah, and if they know they have to put the label on there, they're going to figure out a way to get it out, aren't they?
Well, they're going to have to try, and they can stop spending all this bloody money on the GMO labeling argument, which goes nowhere, and put it into something that can actually do some work, which is exactly why I am so happy to have had you on this program, and I'm so happy to have had you explain to people exactly what this toxin does. And I am so happy to get the opportunity to tell people, don't follow the rotting fish smell here, people. Go for the glyphosate. If it's in there, you do not want to eat it. So thank you, Stephanie Seneff, for joining us this evening. It's been phenomenal to have you with us. Kevin, thanks for the opportunity to rant. It's been great. And we're going to do more of this, I can guarantee you, because now, Monsanto, you've made me mad.
Thank you for your support.
So yes, thank you very much, Stephanie. Thank you so much, Dee. And please visit localsradio.com for our archives for all of our radio shows. They're all very informative. Thank you so much, and we'll see you next week.
Bye-bye.